let me first introduce Mr. Hiroshi Sato. He is in the Institute of Developing Economics. Please give him a hand. He will deliver very interesting arguments regarding development studies in Japan and East Asia. Where did it come from and to whom it has really been meaningful? And second, may I introduce Professor Yamada in Nagoya University. Please welcome. And also we have two distinguished professors as well. As you know, Professor Jung, well-known scholar in this field in Korea. May I introduce Professor Jung, please. Welcome. He is a GSS in Seoul National University. Another panelist from Korea side, Professor Yang Yun-jung, Hankuk University of Foreign Studies. Please welcome. Today, two scholars from Jassid will deliver very interesting argument regarding development studies. As you know, development studies is generally regarded from the Western world, but they raised many questions regarding this kind of mainstreaming development studies by focusing on Asian experience, Asian model, and then they will have some kind of cooperation between Kaidek and Jassid in formulating so-called Asian model of development. Therefore, I expect a very interesting argument from them. And then we'll followed by two distinguished scholars from Kaidek regarding this kind of possibility, whether it is possible or not. If possible, how we can make such a theory from the case study or experience. This is not easy task, but we will expect very good comments about that. And the time for this session is 1.5 hours. Therefore, we have enough time to do that. But it does not mean that you have more time to make presentations. I will give you 20 minutes for each presenter and 10 minutes for panelists. And I'm sure that the 20 minutes will be remained until the end of this session, and then definitely we will give the floor to their comments as well. Finally, the two presenters will make a response to the kind of answers and comments about that, and then we will level up the sessions. And I think we will move to the front here, and then we will make presentations one by one.
So thank you very much, Chairman, and introducing me. And my name is Sato Jung, and I will give some the story about development studies in Japan and East Asia, of course, including Korea. So I have two questions. First, why many Japanese? I think maybe it's the same with the Korean case. Japanese young students go to the Western world, mostly UK and US, when they want to study development studies. Even though there aren't many or some schools, universities in Korea or Japan to study development studies, why are they going to the Western world? There may be two possible answers. One is because Japanese Korean development studies runs behind, so we are backward. So if they want to know more advanced studies, they should go to the West. This is one case. Another answer should be because the origin of the Japanese Korean development studies is different from that of Western studies. It means development studies we use the same word, but development studies in the Western world and development studies in Japan and Korea and East Asia is different. Maybe that is the case, but if we want to see that the international development, world development agencies, such as UN agencies or international NGOs, their logic is based on Western development studies. Therefore, the people, they want to go to the Western world to study about Western studies. Question 2. Why Western donors prefer the word international development, whereas Eastern donors prefer international cooperation? For example, Japanese aid agency is JICA, is Japan International Cooperation Agency, and Korean is the same, Korean International Cooperation Agency. On the other hand, in the Western world, they never use international cooperation. They use international development. US Agency for International Development, Department for International Development in UK, and for example, Swedish International Development Agencies. There is a huge difference in international cooperation and international development. I think the reason is we distinguish the word development in two meanings in our culture. For the Westerners, development is for others, so they help, that's all. But for us, development is about ourselves. And we distinguish between spontaneous development, in Japanese we call it hatten, I don't know in Korean case, but and also the planned or induced development, we call it kaihatsu. The same in Chinese, I know, but I don't know about the Korean case. But so there are two meanings of development. One is spontaneous, one is from outside. We distinguish those two meanings. But for the Westerners, they don't distinguish them. Development just for others. So development is intrinsically for local people, and we're just supporting them. That is the notion of international cooperation. On the other hand, in London, for example, well, the DSA is a counterpart of JASID or KINEC in UK, and there are annual meetings, sometimes I attend, and focus on SDGs this year also. But many people talk about post-colonial situation or power relation among the stakeholders and development discourse. However, they are very deeply conscious about unsymmetrical relation between donors and recipients, because they are donors from the beginning. So they notice that they are superior in power relation or cultural heritage, whatever. So as a good-minded people, they're very conscious about not to abuse this power. But anyway, they're very conscious about this unsymmetrical relationship. I think the origin of Western development studies, they study based on the experience of colonial time. And when colonies become independent in the 1960s, before that, the international development was within their country, their home country and colony. So it's not international, it's within nation. But after the independence, the colony became nation. So it becomes international development. So they use the word international development. There are many common features between these international development and colonial time missionary. Their features and their strategies are very common, I think. In Japan, on the other hand, Japanese government, the shogunate, hired Dutch naval officers to learn how to sail at Nagasaki. That was 1855. It was never the aid from the Dutch. Japanese government paid money, hired the technician to learn their advanced knowledge. After 1867, new Meiji government hired many foreigners as hired teachers in many fields, engineering, machinery, medicine. They are paid as much salary as Prime Minister of Japan at the time. It means there are many budget should be paid from the government, own government, to learn technique of advanced work. In 1875, it's just 8 years after the Meiji Restoration, there were 527 those workers, foreign workers in Japan. and it was very hard burden for the Japanese government. So, Japanese government want to get rid of those foreign teachers as soon as possible. It means they should catch up as much as possible. Sorry. So, what did I do? So, it incentivized Japanese government to learn as quick as possible, as much as possible. On the other hand, today's developing countries, they are given those technicians for free. So they have less incentive to learn quickly. Or rather, they have an incentive to learn longer, as long as possible. But that's very different. So in Japan, I think it's the same in Korea, and belief in technical assistance. We believe in the effectiveness of technical assistance, human to human. So then this belief is based on our own experience. Learning by doing on the job training is a solid tradition of Japanese ODA. And after joining OECD DAC 1964, Japan was criticized this time because OECD DAC, they don't much believe in technical assistance. So we are criticized to heavy dependent on technical assistance on yen alone. Endogenous development theory, it's created by our senior scholars like Katsurumi Kazuko and Nishino Jun. It's one of the attainment of Japanese development studies, I think. But this is a counter-argument of linear and uniform whole universal development theory. We argue that in each country or each society, we have our own path for development. Many Japanese scholars and students like this theory, but in the international development studies, this endogenous development are not so much interested. So very few people talk about it. And Japanese development pancake. Japan's rapid economic growth in 1960s and 70s, and also Korean experience in the 1980s, is a dream for many officials in developing countries. When in Japan or Korea, many officers from developing countries come to learn. They are keen to learn what is the key for the miracle. That is true. And based on this experience, many theories about development economics, such as industrial policy, priority production system, convoy system for nurturing certain industry, etc., which emphasize the role of government. So our development theory emphasizes our role of the government, but this is based on our own experience. And golden age for the Japanese ODA is 1980s. Japan was the pole position of whole world development, the assistance. And at that time, Japanese ODA for the East Asia country as a golden age. They call Trinity model, means Japan insists on trade and investment. This means private investment, private trade, private investment, and aid. For example, so Thailand, industrial zone and supporting infrastructure were constructed by yen loan. This is the ODA, and then followed by investment, private investment by Japanese company. And also for the recruitment of those factories, technical assistance by JICA resulted in employment for the local people, those industrial zones. So that is a mixture and interrelated Trinity model. And in East Asian level, first Japan and Korea also had, and next countries followed. The flying geese theory, as a development economics theory, was created based on this kind of experience. And then, at that time, development economists in World Bank admit the effectiveness of this kind of pattern. So they published the workbook, East Asia Miracle, 1993, praising the role of government intervention in market and the importance of redistribution policy. Japan and Korea may be the prototype of this miracle and this theory. So we have this experience, but in the world of the international development, this experience is much neglected. Then after this time, the 90s, age of social development came. Severe criticism of the World Bank, IMF structural adjustment policy, and then invited, well, not only economics, but also social development is very important. That is the age of social development, 1990s and afterwards. Japan enjoyed the pole position of the year and shifted from industrial development to social development also. And then, during that time, JASIT came out. JASIT was established in 1990. This is the time that Japan shifted from industrial policy to the social development policy. And Japan Rural Studies started excavating for what is Japanese social development. This is very important, I think. As a sociologist, I'm a development sociologist. I did some research work on developing countries, the social impacts of Japan Aid project, and at the same time, I studied about our own experience after World War II. We have very poor rural condition. And then, at the time, United States, as an occupation power, induced Japanese government is home. United States government induced Japanese government to do some social development in rural area. And then Japanese government accepted the social development in rural area as a democratization, whatever. But this experience is very unique because United States ordered their own model of rural development to Japan. But Japan, we accepted the policy, but we adjusted. We domesticated their theory according to our own social situation. So I think this is one of the features of Japanese experience that, of course, we have some in advancement or insufficiency, whatever, so we should learn. But it's not mimicking. It's just not only imitating, but we should adjust. That is one of the features of Japanese development, our own development experience, I think. And then, wandering Japanese development studies, as I mentioned, we have a lot of international cooperation or development studies postgraduate universities, although many young Japanese people go to the Western world. So is there any meaning of Japanese development studies? I believe we have. And one is for the social development or some kind of social sensitive development, we need our own experience to be analyzed more deeply. And then to analyze this for us at the same time for other developing countries. So just it is created, and even though engineers, doctors, trainers, so-called hardcore development scholars, they seldom come to just. They are very busy attending their own international conference. Just it, in that case, is a residue or the remaining part of development studies. I don't believe that. I don't want to be that. Washington, London, Geneva, those are the UN agencies located. People talk about what's the next topic of international development. And the UN agencies talking about SDGs relate, or some international NGOs also talking about new topic according to their own criteria. And East Asia academics, JASIT or KAIRE, mostly excluded that kind of discussion. And so we are only the consumer of those international trends. Well, I'm not so happy. So lack of share what lack of shared value on development. Mainstream Western liberal studies may be perceived as an elegant version of Orientalism. Orientalism, as you may know, Edward Said may say, is kind of mindset to justify the Westerners and colonial situation. In Japan, as it was, Japan has a very bad experience of using this Orientalism to our fellow Asian friends. So Japanese liberal studies should not trap this double Oriental thinking. It means superior-inferior dichotomy. Dichotomy is not suitable for liberal studies. And as again, I say again, made Japan hired foreigners not for mimicking, but adjusting, domesticating technology and institution to our own social cultural circumstances. And I believe in Korea did the same thing. To escape from advanced backward dichotomy, we should not stick to rigid and linear development theory or modernization theory. Non-deterministic development theories, which is flexible to circumstances of each non-Western country, are needed. So, Jersey and Kairek, we have a very good position that because we have our own experience of development. Now we have a chance and also the responsibility to create such kind of development studies for the other development countries together. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sato, for your very good presentation about development and keeping time. That is very important. And Mr. talks about the history of development studies in Japan and Korea, as well as the mainstream of development studies in Western Europe, by showing a multiple meaning of the development as well. And he talks about characteristics of Japan's ODA and golden ages until 1980s. To such an extent that we regarded Japanese modern as Eastern miracle like this, right? But it was straight in 1990s when social development was on the front. But anyhow, he talks about the flexibility or adjustment of the Japanese model to the local condition. This is very important. I believe that. So we will keep the floor and next after presentation of another speaker of that. Finally, he talks about the possibility of a cooperation between about this possibility. This is very conspicuous as well. But you raised many interesting issues. Thank you very much. And may I invite Professor.
Thank you very much, Chairperson, for the introduction. My name is Shoko Yamada from Nagoya University, and I'm in charge of international relations in Japan Society for International Development. Today's topic for my talk is Asianness in development cooperation and potentials for development studies, a comparative study of Japan, South Korea, and China. And I think after hearing the presentation by Professor Sato, there are a lot of complementarity between the two presentations. To start the presentation, I'd like to quote the mission statement of the graduate school, which I am teaching. It was established in 1993, and this statement was made at that time. Let me quote. Cooperation for international development is one of the major missions of Japan in international community, but we haven't conducted enough academic research or training of professionals. Therefore, there is an urgent need to establish the basis of research and education, not restricted by European development model, but with more holistic perspective based on the realities of development countries. So, as early as the beginning of the 1990s, this kind of sentiment to search for Asian model of development studies was there. And Japanese government became the top ODA provider in 1989, and throughout the 1990s, Japan was one of the major donors. You think I can continue? So, these are the graduate schools which were established at the beginning of the 1990s. And the GSID Nagoya University, which was the first one to be established, was where I belong to now. And there are similar schools in Kobe, Hiroshima, and Saitama, which became BRICS later. And there are many scholarship programs for people to pursue postgraduate degree overseas too. So, what was actually done to teach and research in Asian modern life in the last 20 or so years in Japan? So most of those graduate schools which has international development and cooperation programs, they teach a required course on Japanese development experience. My graduate school also. And this, the left-hand side book by Professor Kei Jono is actually based on the the left one is based on the course he teaches in BRICS, which is titled The Economic Development of Japan. And right side is a book published by JICA. So there has been a very keen interest of sharing Japanese development experience in teaching and in doing practices of development cooperation. So what has been actually shared as a development experiences? If you have a chance to glance through these books, you will notice that there are very descriptive, detailed information about policies and practices adopted by the government in specific situations of Japanese development after the Meiji Restoration. So you will have a lot of knowledge about background and programs and regulations regarding the policy changes. And these are basically chronology of development in various fields. But I would say there is no clear segregation between different factors which influence Japanese decision-making about the development policy making. So, for example, as Professor Sato has just mentioned, Japanese people, society and the government borrowed a lot of Western ideas after the Meiji Restoration. It's not uniquely Japanese. Most of them are actually borrowed. So we invited Western experts, we dispatched missions, we sent many young scholars to overseas to get the training. And of course, there are really significant locally invented approaches. But those locally invented approaches and borrowed ideas are presented in a seamless connection as a chronology of development of Japan, and no distinction were presented there. And also those pressures from within and outside of the countries which significantly condition the policy making are not clearly presented as factors to determine the policy choices. So here I would propose a rigorous discussion about how we can move from talking of Asian models, rich case studies, to alternative development fields. So far, we have been very keen on sharing development experiences. You know, I know that in both Japan and Korea, and also in China, they are very keen to share experiences. They are basically case studies and bound to historical, cultural, social context when the country was in the process of development. But there is a serious missing link to make it a more upscaled theory of development. We have to extract combinations of elements and patterns of development. We have to generalize, and we have to locate our theories in the map of existing development theories. Now, I have revised my presentation after it was included in your handout, and also I need to skip some of the slides. So please look at the PPT on the slide. So this is the findings I'm going to present is based on the research I have done for my own book. But this is a qualitative text analysis of 8 policy documents by Asian countries, Asian donors. And in the book, I have compared 5 countries and 2 regional organizations, but today I'm going to focus on 3 Asian countries, Japan, South Korea, and China. The purpose of doing this work was to identify the connotations of using the term like Asian uniqueness or Asian models. You know, each country talk about Asian models, Asian uniqueness, Asian. But then they mean slightly different thing. And also, whenever they talk of Asian, actually they are talking of the superiority of their country, not Japan. So I'm trying to untangle what they actually meant by talking of Asia. But before going to the specifics of each country, let me talk of some common historical and cultural traits which are referred to in these policy documents. These 3 countries, Northeast Asian donors, share the similar sentiment that they want to demonstrate some uniqueness, peculiarity against the Western hegemony. But at the same time, they cannot just say that we are different. So to be able to say something unique, they always try to refer back to the history and culture. So that's how Confucius ideas are referred frequently. And also, even when it is not overtly referred to, you can sense the kind of common, similar way of thinking which are behind the overtly stated policy directions. So one characteristic is consideration about leadership of the institution. Under the Confucius tradition, government is naturally centralized. It's natural because the leaders are there to lead people. Leaders know what people need. So what is necessary for a leader is a good morality to lead people. At the same time, it is supported by the morality of the general public too, to understand the nature of the leadership and also to obediently support the leader. So this is a matter of mutual morality between the public and the leaders. So government is centralized, and also inherently Confucius value trust in the leadership. So they don't question about the appropriateness of the leadership. So, for example, China is often criticized for not looking at the people's needs, but just hearing the voices of the leaders of the country. But that is kind of natural extension of the Confucius way of trusting the leaders. They are saying things on behalf of people. That is the basis of non-interference. And the bureaucracy is also considered as instrumental. They don't have their own will. They don't have their will to corruption or reflecting their self-interest into the policy making or administration. So there is no mechanism to question about bureaucracy's governance capacity. And there is also acceptance of status quo. Basically, the society is seen in the harmony and balance. And there is not very strong motivation for development, for change. So that is a kind of basic shared ideas about society, leadership, and institution. And also, I myself am an educationist. So I'm always concerned about the education aspect of the policy making. But at the same time, even if you are not educationists, you will clearly recognize the very strong emphasis placed on education in Asian aid policies. It may not be said in the word education, but it may be said as a matter of cultivation of people's mind or as a matter of capacity development. So as I said, good governance, according to the Confucius notion, depends not only on the capacity of the leaders, but also that of people. And it is highly the moral value of education. So being educated is largely a matter of moral behavior. Just having a lot of knowledge is not worth respected in the society. And at the same time, Asian education value is not only focusing on the morality, but also pragmatism. So pragmatism leads to very skill-oriented technical cooperation and education programs. So Asian donors, all China, Korea, and Japan, are known for good technical vocational education programs and technically oriented educations and experience-based learning. And also the third point which I'd like to highlight is the holisticity of the nature of education. There is often a kind of misunderstanding of communication between those people who talk of education programs in Asia and education sector aid discussed in the OECD DAC context. Asian people tend to talk of education in a much broader sense. And then in that kind of sense, technical cooperation projects can be considered as educational because it is capacity building and moral improvement of morality and commitment of people in the process of teaching and learning. And so it's not only about the school-based, curriculum-based education. So here you can recognize some kind of a mismatch of the usage of same term. Even though people are talking about education aid, actually what they think based on that term would be completely different. So I'll skip this slide and let me quickly mention about yes, the contrast between the Western notion of nation states, development, and humanitarianism against what I have explained about the Confucius tradition. So since I'm not a political scientist, I'm not a specialist of this, but there's at the bottom of the international relations and international development discourse, there is an understanding of nation-state as a unit of interaction in the international scene. And that is based on the thinking that legitimate states were based on the representation of group of people, nations, united by language and culture. And the selection should be, legitimacy is based on the election, and then elected government is sovereign. That is a nation-state notion under the Westphalian framework. And then economically, there is a neoliberalism, privatization, deregulation, free trade, etc. And at the same time, there is humanitarianism, which is basically to respect basic human rights. And then, anybody who doesn't enjoy the human rights according to the universal values, they have to be supported, regardless of the national sovereignty or regardless of any conditions. So these three, major theoretical framework presented in the Western imagination, some of them conflict among each other because if you pursue the humanitarianism to the large extent, you will intervene into the sovereignty of the states. And neoliberalism may conflict with the humanitarianism either. But these are the kind of things we are familiar with. So these will lead to certain kinds of policy options provided by the Western donor communities, such as democratic elections, privatization and decentralization, removal of trade barriers, and expanded social services. Now, well, today what I'm doing is rather to propose a way of, kind of way of thinking to conceptualize Asian development theories. And I thought I can locate some of the Asian donors' policies in these intersections of the different orientations according to the Western paradigm. And the vertical arrow which I put is the arrow between the state sovereignty and interventionism. If you respect a lot of state sovereignty, then it will, you tend not to intervene into the national issues. But if you are more interventionist and humanitarianly oriented, you will get to the lower side, and then you tend to intervene into the national issues. And there are also arrows, horizontal arrow between socialism and individualism. If you are socially oriented, you may not intervene into the small individual issues because society's orientation is more highlighted. But individualism might be more humanitarian and Western voluntarism oriented thinking. And economically, there are state-controlled economy and neoliberal economy. And East Asian development models are more likely to be closer to the state-controlled economy, while the World Bank and those Western donors promoted conditionalities tend to go to the other end. So those location of 3 East Asian donors is just my brain exercise, and I think you have a lot of criticism about that. But this is just a proposal of way of thinking. So let me jump those slides after this. I haven't touched on them after it is included in your handout. So please just read them if you are interested in. And let me jump to the conclusion. So here is a paradigm shift. We are in a very interesting moment of paradigm shift toward post-2015. And there is no single dominant model to align with because there are emerging actors, civil society actors. Asia is so diverse. So actually, there is no single model. So in that kind of situation, what can we consider as the regionality of Asia Pacific? Is there any commonalities? What makes us different and what makes us similar? That I think will be a very important exercise among scholars in this region. And to do that, I remind you what I have already said. Presenting Asian theory or theories of development. To do that, the argument which do not demonstrate sophistication according to the established Western disciplinary framework will not be picked up as serious academic challenges. In fact, I think if you are born in the UK or US and if you are familiar with that kind of way of thinking, you don't have to overcome this step. But actually, if you are from Asia and if you try to present something different, alternative, as a theory, not as a case study, I think you have to start by mastering what they are doing and then go beyond that. So that is a matter of sophistication and mastery of Western notion of development theories. And yes, the question is whether we have truly digested existing development theories to critically examine them. And we can easily criticize things without knowing what you are criticizing about. But if our theory is to be fully accepted or at least to be considered important enough to listen to, I think we have to understand what they are talking about fully. And what we tend to consider Asian should be theorized at the metaphysical level instead of presenting them as a series of case studies and impressions. So this is the end of my presentation. I appreciate your comments and questions. Thank you very much.
아, PPT. 아, 미안합니다. 미안합니다. 나는 sorry for that. This is coming from.
Okay, thank you for the presentation of very nice two papers. Actually, after I heard about the presentations, I concluded we are much more agreeing actually than disagreeing. When I read the handouts, I thought that we had some different points, but maybe that's not the case. So. So I'll skip the summary because they very nicely presented. And my first comment is about the first paper. The first paper emphasized a lot about it's needed that we need to approach the development issues from the East point of view. And I fully agree. But I want to point another important perspective, I think. Is the east-west distance is farther or the north-south distance is farther? Meaning that is our previous development cooperation in many cases fails because we did not understand the east better than the west, or because we did not understand the south than the north. So we have to think about this issue. So main point is, we need to understand the eastern perspective of development quite clearly, and it should be very important. But at the same time, understanding and efforts and attempts understanding the South should be also very important, because at the end of the day, what we need to do is we need to adapt let's say the Eastern style of development theory to the South anyway. So that way, I think this East-West and North-South balance, I think should be important. And when we talk about going back to the Eastern perspective, when we say our own So our own, what's the boundary of our own? And here today's two papers emphasized about Asia as a boundary. That's, I think it's important. But when we say our own, we have to be careful about not grouping too much. So let's say, perhaps the better way to approach this understanding Eastern perspective is actually start from the Japan, Korea, China separately. And then we compare them to synthesize them. But if we start from the Asia itself, we may go actually nowhere. So, I think the goal is just the same. My goal and your goal are just the same, but perhaps we have to bear in mind that we need to also think about the uniqueness of each country as well. So, why are we doing this? I think that's the thing we have to think about also. Understanding East Asian development experience is very important, but perhaps it's not because East is right and West is wrong, nor because East is right for the East, West is right for the West. I think it's important because the East Asian development experience providing another or alternative way of viewing the development for everyone. So that's the thing that we should bear in mind. And from that point of view, actually Professor Yamada already emphasized that we need a systematic approach and also feel the missing link to develop a new development theory. I fully agree with it. And from that point of view, I think what we need is understanding the mapping between initial conditions. By initial conditions, I mean the constraints each country has been facing, and also the economic environment surrounding each developing countries, into the realized development. How each country could overcome their constraints to activate such a development, what were the hurdles, and what were the mechanisms to overcome such hurdles. So that approach can be useful for every country, because once you understand such a mechanism, you can actually adapt such mechanisms to other countries much more easily. But if we emphasize too much about the surface level policy outcome, like export orientation policy and some rural development policy, well, in case of Korea, these days the Semal movement is a key word, but what do we really mean by the Semal movement? So what's really behind to make that rural development in Korea successful? So we should focus on those kind of mechanisms. Most country-led knowledge sharing development programs have little pitfalls of emphasizing too much of know-how. Know-how is clearly important. It's much better than just providing the principles. So providing know-how is important, but without having know why, that know-how may be useless as well. So I think the balance between the know-how and the know why is quite crucial. So let me again, please skip to this page. Well, and sorry, I'm facing the same difficulty. So going back to the east-west and north-south, I think just understanding the development mechanism itself is half. The other half is how to adapt it. To do that, we also need to understand the south. Here is the importance of understanding or bridging the gap between north and south. So that is another thing that I want to emphasize. And finally, well, we're talking about providing the new development theory from the Easterners' point of view, but I want to ask, do we really understand our own development experience? Actually, I'm a little pessimistic about it. For example, one of the major points that Professor Yamada and Professor Sato emphasized was the distinction between state and market. And I agree that the role of the explicit the market intervention by the government was important. But even Daniel Roderick, who actually supported that kind of perspective, is changing his mind these days. In 1990s, he emphasized a lot of the importance of the state intervention in the development of East Asian countries, but these days he's saying that what is more important is actually democratization, not the government intervention. So this way it's kind of changing. Okay. So I think it's because Daniel Roderick, for example, is an external observer. So he doesn't know the detailed internal stories. So from that, I think we have a very important advantage of proposing the development theory from the East point of view. And well, also we are having too much priors that we actually know what drove the Japanese growth and development and Korean growth and development? Actually, I'm not sure. For example, was it the rural development or the industrial policy which was more importantly matter for both Japanese and Korean growth? Do we have an evidence? Perhaps not. I remember that Professor Yamada used the word impression. So maybe we have an impression, but we don't have much of the hardcore evidence to answer these questions. And also, Kaizen is emphasized a lot by many Japanese development agencies. It's quite plausible and convincing, but do we know why? Was it important? Or why not? Am I going backward? Yeah, I think so. And these are kind of questions actually that cannot be answered by the residue, according to the Professor Sato's expression. So I think we need to really mobilize the research. That's the very important point that we should bear in mind. And I'll end my comments by showing you 3 graphs. Well, this is the development path among 3 countries, Japan and Korea and China compared to the US. Well, it seems that among these 3 countries, except the taking of point, actually development path looks quite similar. But compared to other Asian countries like the Philippines and India and Bangladesh, they look very different. So actually the Asia itself is diverse. And the final graph, well, another thing that we should bear in mind is, well, Africa and Asia are quite different. And let me emphasize some important factors. Here, in 1950s, well, Korea was about the income level of the DR Congo and Kenya and Ghana, actually a little lower, and even Japan, for example, its income level was this is Japan. It was superseded by the 2 African countries. One was Mauritius, the other was South Africa. But these countries showed a very slow growth, or it took a really long time to take off. So I agree with Professor Sato that development is still our issues in this sense, because our starting point was actually poor countries. Well, Japan was much more advanced, but still, compared to the Western European countries, and this gap was quite prominent in the beginning, but this kind of gap disappeared and actually reversed. So why was happening here is a great research agenda. And remembering this initial gap, I think it will be very helpful. Okay, that's end of my comments.
Thank you, Professor Chung, about your comments. Very meaningful and very insightful comments, I guess, that regarding Mr. Sato and Professor Yamada's presentations about it. This is not easy comments about it, but Mr. Professor Chung talks about many, the issues regarding the development, the possibility of Asian models, and then the weakness of this model as well. And then sometimes he agreed with 2 presenters. On the other, he raised many inside the locations based on the many details about that. So maybe we will take another comments from the sponsors to present as well. May I invite the last comments, Professor Yang, about her comments, please.
Thank you very much. Especially thank you for giving me a chance to comment on these two brilliant presentations. And the third presentation, you're not going to have the fourth one. I'm going to make it the brief one. I mostly agree with Professor Chung, one earlier panelist. In terms of the both presentations have started by asking, we actually, to say this way, Professor Kansato has mentioned about indigenous development, and Professor Yamada has started saying that there is no one fixed model. But then at the end, you both seem to try to find out some kind of Asian model or something new to the Western model. But first of all, in fact, yes, I would to be also cautious in trying to theorize into one specific Asian model. First of all, we don't really have one specific Western development theory, in fact. And on top of that, I also agree with Professor Chung that we have to know ourselves and our development path or process. And by saying this, I would like to remind you, the audience, that in the morning session, plenary session, we've talked about how lack of the evidence-based research regarding Korean development path and process, for example. And if I understand correctly, the indigenous development, I believe that each country has its own historical and socio-economic and cultural context where they build up their own development process. And in that sense, if we believe that, I believe that so, then if that's what we believe, and on top of that, we believe that any development process of a country should come from and initiated by those people, rather than being advised to follow some other lessons. If that's the case, we agree, then perhaps coming up with another theory of an Asian model of development could be a risky process, I believe. And then having said this, I think what we should do actually to know our development process. For example, for the example of Korea, with our Korean development studies have flourished actually just in about a dozen years, since 2000, especially when we become kind of emerging donor. And then that's quite interesting because I believe that development itself, it's a historical transition of every country, every moment until today. But when we talk about development, we tend to focus on economic takeoff or economic growth. That we tend to say and try to take kind of lessons, or we try to make or theories or some research regarding the certain periods that we did achieve high economic growth, say 60s, 70s. But I believe that's one part that I'd like to say. I'm going to say three important parts that I think we should give more efforts in doing the research about the development process. One is about past, how we did it, what we did achieve. For example, throughout the 70s, industrial policy have been very efficient. Yes, that could be kind of formula manner, as in the morning session, Professor Lee has mentioned. KDI or Korean government is trying to make a kind of important lessons from what we've achieved. But the other side, I think, development is not just belong to the past. It affects the past decisions, affects today's world. And then, as this morning, the president of KOICA himself has acknowledged, Korean society is not without problems nowadays, and especially along with the SDGs, which are supposed to be applied to developed countries as well. Development is not just a problem or issue of developing or least developed countries, but also it's an issue of everyone, regardless of the level of economic well-being. Because we are not talking about quality of life or environment, sustainable development. And I believe that the past development experiences and decision-makings influence the current status of society. For example, Korea is facing lots of current issues like aging, we mentioned earlier, aging and the high elderly poverty in old age is not completely free from the decision-making which was done in earlier development paths of Korea, which saw the poor working population as very much important population, and all the government policies have pretty much on this poor working population. Same issue with the dual labor market issues and the discriminations of non-regular workers, or the problems with women not being in the labor market. All this has been much influenced from earlier decision makings. But what I try to say is we also want to, it's one thing that we want to come up with some kind of lessons for, let's say, other catch-up economies from our own experiences, but also we have to face and think about what we've done wrong as well. Because we don't want to say that, look, this is what we achieved in the past, and this is what we're struggling now. Because I think development is such a ongoing process for every country. And then plus the third part that I would like to draw your attention is that what we are doing now as a donor country. This development, to my impression, development studies getting popular only when a country becomes a donor, for example. That Professor Kantasto has started by asking why students want to go abroad. Partly because there are many other reasons that they want to get more global environment, more academic methodology, etc. But partly because our development story as a donor is very short. And then, as I said earlier, our development, for example, Korean development studies have flourished in about 10 or 20 years. And as we talked in the plenary session in the morning, we don't really have much solid evidence-based research. It's more something about policy papers or discourses. And I believe that diversity within the development studies is coming nowadays only. And we are collecting kind of findings, what we're not doing, etc. I think we need more time to build up our own case studies. I think we should do more case studies rather than jump up to the making theories out of it. And especially when we go abroad and try to kind of get engaged as a donor or a partner with the recipient or partner countries, that what we do and how does it really make sense in their own context. That kind of work should be more rigorously done. I think these are three parts that I'd like to comment.
Thank you very much, Professor Yang, for your very precious comments about the presentations about that. We already completed the 2 presentations and 2 panel opinions about that. And the time is allotted. I give you the floor to make some kind of comments about that. Yeah.
Because I used to say to my students that you should be the first question. I should show you the nice observation. Teaching in college education and international global education opportunities. Well, I'm glad that I hear again in this topic of Korean model, Japanese model, Chinese model, or Asianness and the like. But hearing what you said came up to my mind that is Asian model is alternative to the Western paradigm of concept and practices, or it's a replacement of Western things, or it's just instrumental to Western things. Which I'm asking is because in Korean case, when we started talking about Korean model of ODA, definitely it was under the rubric of Western style paradigm of development of values, practices, and the like. Korea wants to be efficient and effective paradigm. But it seems to me that in talking about Asianness, maybe we are searching for something different in ethics, in values, and all the other technical aspects. So I want to ask whether it is challenging to the Western paradigm dominance of ODA or international development cooperation, or it will just show some alternative or complementary parallel things. What are the fundamental purpose of talking about this Asian needs, Korean, Japanese, and Chinese? And most of all, I looked at the World Bank and the OECD for a while, and nobody, it seems to me that nobody's looking for Chinese there in serious sense. They intentionally avoid facing Chinese presence in ODA work. So where are in between? I mean, Bangladesh also include China, but actually there's no Chinese here. And China is really changing everything from the basics. How are talks about Asian versus Western from the question and comments?
Thank you very much, Professor Zhang, about the raising many issues about the Asian model is alternative to the development or not, based on Korean experience, and also particularly in Chinese cases, is yes, very curious about their presence in all the history. But anyhow, yes, please. Your name?
My name is Song Hyun-sung. It's a short question. Is it compatible with the Asian developed model with the current international trade system, WTO? Japan, Korea, and China used to have a very protective domestic market. So it's a very, very important element of the Asian developed model, but it's no longer possible. And the second one is, see, Japan, Korea, and China has only one race. So people can could accept government, but Latin America, there are basically two kinds of people, and many African countries, there are many races, so they cannot really believe or give credit to the government. So that's also seems to be it's a limit to the Asian model. So I'd like to get some comments from you.
Thank you very much. Is it really right? China, Korea, and Japan are one race, same race. I don't know. But anyhow, okay, race.
One race.
Yes.
One race.
Yeah, one race. One race is fine, but not one race is at all. His comment. Any comments is acceptable. We have right now one more, the comments to the floor. If not, we will continue to present their comments about that. Okay, the time is up. So we have two very, very good combinations. Two comments from the floor. We have 6 actors gathered together. And may I give the floor to Professor Sato and Yamada for your response very briefly, and we will develop it.
Maybe 5 minutes or less. Okay. Thank you very much for your comments and the questions. First of all, I'm very happy to be here because in Japan, as ex-president of JASIT, sometimes people hesitated to attacking me. But anyway, here it's very good. And also, I really appreciated for those two comments, and mostly I agree. First, a point that I don't use the Asian model by myself because I don't believe in the Asian model. But what I'm thinking about is that the term says that who are we? Okay, who are the audience of the world things? Development studies based on East Asian model. The audience should be developing countries as a whole, regardless Asia or whatever. Why? Because the Western people, our Western nations, they are studying modernization based on their culture and society. And others, we should start modernization based on the other's culture, which is very big difference as a sociologist, I say. That is, we should change our society to modernize. That was a pressure. So for us, it means non-Westerners, modernization should be the combination of industrialization, democratization, but at the same time westernization. That point is totally different. And that conflict, that makes a conflict of development and local society. So I think that this is common for whole developing countries, which is non-Western origin. So that is one thing. Another thing is that you mentioned about the kind of the stage-like theory of Japan, South Korea, and China. I don't believe in that also. So each country has its own, but each country its own the modernization or development theory and experience. But I think most important thing is that how to domesticate, how to adjust foreign idea and system, whatever. To that point, China, Japan, Korea, they have our own experience. And those experience should be, to some extent, applicable to other countries, especially Africa, some other countries. They're just taking their model as it is and trying to accept it, regardless of the social situation. That makes a conflict. So to avoid those conflicts created by the development, we should avoid. I think that for that point, our experience should be valuable, I believe. And Dr. Yan's point, it's true that the development is not past. In Japan, as I said, that Korea, aging and the depopulation of rural area. That is the result of our development policy. It means that other countries also may follow the same path. So we should avoid, I think it should be avoided. So if we have this problem because of our development, okay, this experience should be valuable. And the experience should be shared for others. And about the point of the WTO, I'm very, very interested in the contradiction of WTO and UN agencies. We had SDGs, okay? So it says that leave no one behind. Okay, we have TPP. TPP is a trade partnership among the area. So there are a lot of regional trade agreements, US, EU, Asia. But there are some countries who are never could be joined on those regional agreements. So this is contradict leave no one behind. So we should tackle with the free trade organization and also UN agencies. Well, in that point, Japan, as a kind of the late starters of the modernization and the free trade, we're trying to protect. But now the world standard is to liberalize. But this protectionism, well, to some extent, it is needed. If it's needed, well, Japan should be kind of the advocator or supporter for those countries. But Japan is not doing this. This is also the challenge for development studies. in Japan. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Professor.
I'll try to be very brief because I noticed that it is almost the end of the session. I'd like to answer the comments in 2 points. One is the response to the comments both from Professor Yang and Professor John regarding the know-how, the importance of response to the demand for know-how or the importance of the case studies. I completely agree that the case studies and those more prescriptions for the symptoms to solve the symptoms is also important. And that, I think, is what Japanese scholars and Japanese ODA government officials have been actually focusing on in the last 25 years or so. I think I should avoid to easily fall into the Asian category, but I think Asian, at least Korean and Japanese scholars and practitioners have that tendency, shared tendency that we prefer to talk of the specific experiences. But at the same time, the reason why I or some scholars of Japanese and development studies community start to talk of the theorization is that it is a kind of issues of challenges for identity of the development studies people in the Japanese society after 25 years. You have been accumulating the cases. There must be very brilliant case studies. That's nice. So after all, what have you been doing as a development scholars? So you need to kind of have a framework, either it is a theoretical framework or methodological framework, to demonstrate what exactly this field is all about. So it is a kind of a context which we are facing now in Japanese specific context, but also I think you are facing Korea in some period. And also, it also connects to the second point I'd like to talk about. Either to situate yourself in the WTO framework or DAC framework, or to demonstrate your uniqueness completely outside of that scope, would also lead to the comments by Professor Gong and Chun that is this discussion about theory more instrumental kind of theorization, or is it more to provide completely alternative paradigm? I think it is related to your society's strategy of situating yourself in relation to the distance from those existing framework. I think Japan and Korea is more toward aligning to the global framework. That's why I think the theoretical discussions may have more adaptive natures and a more instrumental kind of discussion instead of completely overturning the existing framework. But the reason why I went to dig into those ancient philosophies and stuff in my study of aid policies is that those places you start at the common roots. But then different donors deviate to different directions because of their reactions and distance from the mainstream framework. And so, well, it may not directly respond to it, but I think we have to think of the, nexus of historical roots and experiences to the location of that society in a global society. Where do they want to present themselves? Within or outside of the existing framework, and also the theoretical pictures of the development, the field of development studies in which we are trying to present our research outcomes. So I'm not sure whether I have responded to all of the comments, but this is what I would like to respond.
Thank you very much, Professor Yamada, for your precious comment as well. I think it's time for us to wrap up this conversation as well. Let me give you some thought about this session as well. I mean, when I look at OECD DAC Secretariat in 1997 to 1998, I attended many conferences in the DAC meetings. And I found out that many like-minded countries from Western Europe, they always criticize Japan's, their strategies, their predictor type corporations, and everything. I don't know why they hate Japanese. maybe not. That's the reason why the Japanese government has some kind of necessity to investigate the possibility of the Asian model to justify the Japanese body, programs as well. But it seems to me that considering the fact that the many theory, especially in Western oriented theory, was failed in the last 6 decades, it means that we cannot monopolize that kind of theory as a mainstreaming. I mean, there are many mistakes as well, shortcomings as well. Therefore, as alternative, I think we can explore the possibility for the Asian models to be another development theory as well. But it is quite difficult to stay at the case study or is level up to the theory. It is quite different. In order to be a theory, it takes more time, more generalizing processes, and logical thinking about it, and uniqueness in the past might be developing to the universality. So we will see that this kind of arguments or presentations will have some kind of room, the basis for another development theory, especially based on Asian experience. That is, I think, this session is worthwhile to make about it.